history of the neighborhoods around Raleigh and how racially restrictive rules shape the development of those neighborhoods.
These are called housing covenants. They're contracts that prevented certain people from buying or even living in certain neighborhoods. Sydney Schofield shows us the map just released today and what it can tell us about our past and the future.
The language was ugly, the intent was ugly, the result is ugly.
When neighborhoods in Wake County were originally founded, developers set rules in a document called a covenant, allowing for things like sewer access or whether an alleyway was part of your property. But some also included racially restrictive language, saying things like people of color were not allowed to live on the property unless they were servants. A 1948 Supreme Court decision and then the Fair Housing Act of 1968 ultimately rendered those rules unenforceable, but the damage had been done.
And the real impact of these is that for generations, for 60 years, all these properties were only available to be bought and sold by Caucasians.
Lisa Bacchetti and Bob Williams live in Wake County. Now retired, they decided to take on a project to find all these racially restrictive covenants and map them to help us better understand how Wake County neighborhoods were shaped.
It's always been available to anyone to hunt for them. But before AI, before someone with the time to spend, it would have been really hard to collect and collate everything.
Married for 47 years, they make a good team, but they couldn't do this amount of work alone.
No money was spent to do this work. It was just the community coming together.
Hundreds of volunteers helped comb through tens of thousands of pages of historic documents, finding 15,000 covenants in Wake County with racially restrictive language. They used the data to make this map, showing you from 1905 to 1950 where only white people were allowed to live. This map shows where people are more socially vulnerable, taking things like income, access to resources, and education levels into account. When you combine the two maps, you see that many of the areas with these covenants are far less socially vulnerable today, decades later.
It was concentrated in generational wealth in that area. And it was that way, it wasn't for a few years, it was for 60 years at least.
Lisa and Bob hope that now that this data is easy to access, it will spark conversation and potentially change around the persistent racial and socioeconomic inequities that have plagued Wake County for decades. Now, there have been conversations around adding some kind of notation to these original covenants or possibly filing new documents altogether to denounce this racially restrictive language. But the Register of Deeds is adamant that this language will not be removed, saying it is essential that we do not erase history. Reporting from Raleigh, Sydney Schofield, ABC 11 Eyewitness News.